Well, look, Pat, we've got this sort of all is hot, and basically Microsoft, now AWS, we'll talk about that, and Google, they're kind of dominating the discussion around AI right now. And then on the hardware side, basically it's been all NVIDIA. I mean, NVIDIA, rules the roost. But, the Groq story is all about bringing the cost of compute to zero. And it's really about new ways to enable large language models to run on silicon that's lower power, that costs less, specialized. And so Jonathan Ross, CEO, kicked it off and really was saying, like, what you and I've been saying, like, there's no way, unless you've been living under a rock, that you haven't heard about what's going on with generative AI. It's going to change everything. It's going to change the world. And of course, it's sort of a moment for a company like Groq. This is their moment. That's what I would say. This is their moment. Like, up to this point, doing high performance computing, specialized workloads, compiling, these are things that they've been talking about. But with the sudden onset of, whether it's, OpenAI or Bard or Llama, having different silicon is going to become really important, Pat. And I think you and I could probably argue that either through, some very confidential conversations we've had, so we can't reveal details. We've heard a lot from CEOs that are trying to deal with this problem, that they need to figure out how to do it cheaper because GPUs are expensive and they use a lot of power. And they need to be able to do it more sustainably because, no matter where you sit on the continuum of believing in ESG and those initiatives, the data centers use a lot of electricity and they use a lot of water. And so that is a real problem. And if everybody at once was to start pivoting over to these large language models using generative AI tools on the daily basis, it's going to use a ton of horsepower. This is where Groq thinks it could really play a part. And I think it's showing that both through its ASICs, the silicon it's developing, as well as its compiler. And that's a big part of the Groq Day story, was the company's ability, and we talked about this on the pod once before, but to really quickly be able to enable a large language model to run on a specific piece of silicon that isn't NVIDIA. I mean, that's basically right now, most of these large language models are being built to run on NVIDIA. And if you want to move it off NVIDIA, that process can be somewhat cumbersome. So this is where Groq really focuses all into what they're talking about, their compiler, the kernel-less compiler that is able to really, really quickly adapt. And the company can basically deal with the fact that these language models are not going to be finite. They're going to be continuously changing. And so in the current setup, the amount of work you have to do to compile and be able to continue to update and modify and expand on these models would be expensive, would be prohibitive. You'd need developer resources you don't have. And they're saying, well, we can make this really fast. We can make it really easy. And of course, you can run it on lower cost silicon. So, the company is focused on basically what they're kind of leaning into ML agility, which is it's kind of a measurement to make, AI more accessible and make it lower cost. And so, they're kind of leaning in here, Pat. And so there are several players in this particular space. We've talked about some of them. I've been pretty vocal. I think everybody not named NVIDIA right now has an interesting opportunity to grab market share because, one, the market's going to get bigger. And so it's going to be very hard for NVIDIA to keep up with all the demand they're going to drive. But I really do think if I double click on what I said earlier, the cost and sustainability issues are going to be substantial right now. And GPUs are power hogs. They just are. There is no way around it. Now, they are getting more efficient. They are coming down in price for performance, but the volume and the amount of racks of A100s or 800s or H800, is palpable. And so can we get these to be smaller, lower profile, lower cost, more efficient, and then of course faster for companies to be able to move data and stand up models? That's a really big story to watch for, Pat. And so I think Groq's in an interesting inflection. They need to get more customers. They need to get more adoption. They need to get more case studies in market. But I do think, especially if what I mentioned before, if we really are at the end of the interest rate cycles, if we are going to see VC and investment come back into growth, I would have to imagine this is an area they would want to invest right now, because on top of all this great software and all these great generative apps that we're all talking about, none of this stuff runs without silicon. And so are we going to try to find more efficient ways to do that, or are we just going to kind of go status quo? And I'm not sure, Pat, but this is where I think Groq has a great opportunity.
So Good analysis, Dan. There was a lot
Thanks.
of things that I like. So first off, let's look at the approaches out there in the market. You have NVIDIA, in particularly with its training, that really leans into using its GPU. It does have small blocks of ASICs, like for transformer models to give it acceleration, but NVIDIA is all about programmability, really based on the hardware itself, and then they build on top of that an environment that can change, right? And then everybody else uses, I would say, more of an ASIC approach, but they put a programmatic model that's different. Now, ASICs by design are always going to be more efficient on running a certain set of code. And the ASIC folks, and I put Groq in that, and also TenStorrent, put different ways of programming in there. So everybody is headed in the same direction to accomplish it. They're just doing it in a different way. And one thing that I really appreciated what Jonathan brought up, that very few people are talking about, that people are losing money in the generative AI space, right? It is really expensive. I remember on the
Including
plane,
Microsoft.
I remember being on the plane, you and I talking, going out to Microsoft for their big event, and saying, hey, my number one question is affordability. And I think it was the number two question at the Microsoft Financial Analyst Day, but they really didn't want to go in that direction. They did talk about, hey, if I can get 10% market share in the ad business, look at how much money is here. So in other words, yeah, it's expensive, but if I can take money away from Google and Facebook for advertising, don't even worry about it. It doesn't matter what it costs, but it is expensive. And I think we've also seen Google's very cautious wade in this, because they own search. Moving a search that costs 10 cents and moving it to something that costs $1 does not make monetary sense. So it is expensive. And the other thing that came out, which I appreciated too, is energy. We have yet to add up the amount of energy that this generative AI with these foundational models is going to cost. And that is an area where I do believe that Groq is focused. The other directional space that I think they're headed that I like is it's all about the software. The hardware is important. And in fact, the company talked about bringing a new piece of hardware for generative AI out. But this notion of a compiler that can automatically generate code for generative AI models is the direction. And in fact, Groq believes its compiler and its software, you can actually use their software to spit out models to be used on other people's hardware, which I think is important as well, because it takes away an objection that says, hey, if I standardize on Groq, it doesn't mean that I'm locked in. So I'm super interested to see, customer stories. And by the way, not every AI company has customers out there. I know Groq does, but some of their competitors can't cite a single customer. And the other thing is some haven't actually gone to production with their chips. So there's different levels of reality about this. The final comment about Groq is they kept their cash burn low, which I think will help them long term. I do believe that some of the competitors out there are teetering, the ones that came out super duper early and who spent a ton of money on OpEx.